services, products, and investment companies out of the Chandigarh region. And also the co-founder and CEO, Grazitti Interactive. All yours, Alok, sir.
Hello.
Sorry. भाई साहब, निहारिका तुम्हें पता होना चाहिए कौन सूरज के आगे लालटेन की बात नहीं करते. So I'm particularly privileged today to have whom I think has been a visionary in lots of ways for me. वैसे मेरे कुछ mentors यहाँ भी बैठे हैं आगे, but किताबें आप ही की पढ़ते थे, annual report की. So Dr. Anand Deshpande, for some of you who are new, has been in the business of software for 34 years now. He started fresh out of college in 1990 after his PhD. मतलब US से इन्होंने, if you read his annual reports and his story, US से फ़ोन करके इन्होंने अपने फादर को बोला कि कंपनी खोल दीजिए, मैं आ रहा हूँ और यहाँ से सॉफ्टवेयर कंपनी पुणे से शुरू करेंगे. The conviction with which you started, sir, you want to talk about what was the conviction that got you started, and then we'll talk about other things.
Well, first, it's a real pleasure to be here in Chandigarh, in this beautiful city, so thank you for inviting me. 1990, when I came back, if you were to ask me now, or if you ask people at that time, they thought I was pretty stupid to do what I was doing. India was not really known for software. It was pretty hard to do any software export at all. And we were one of the first companies set up an STP in India. And we were pretty much trailblazers in this whole software technology park scheme. And the concept was new, and it was pretty silly to expect that this could happen. And for many of you who are not very familiar with the 90s, let me give you a few information points from there. One is when I came back to India in 1990 October, Mr. VP Singh was our Prime Minister. Then within 1 week, Chandrasekhar became the Prime Minister. And nothing really moved. And government had set up this software technology park in Pune, which was the first software technology park in India. And the total space that they had taken for that software technology park was 8,000 square feet. And they had given that 8,000 square feet to 14 companies. And we were not one of them. So it took a lot of work to get that 350 square feet from the government to start Software Technology Park. And you had to do it from that location because at that point they were following a model of the SEEPs, which was these bonded warehouse and all kinds of stuff. So, right now I can say that I am a visionary, I had the foresight. If you ask people at that time, it was kind of stupidity as well. So there's a fine line between stupid and visionary. It's all at the same time. But the intention was to come back to India, was the main reason for coming back. And if I have to come back, I had to do something. That's how the whole company idea was started.
Great, great. So from that 350 square feet to 1 billion ARR almost, a $1 billion company. And I think in the last 5 years, you've gone from $500 million to a $1 billion. But I think for a lot of us who are here in Chandigarh, what is more interesting is that journey from when you went from 100 to 1,000. We have a lot of entrepreneurs here, who easily get it to the 100 to, or the equivalent would be, 10 crores to 100 crores, or 10 crores to 300 crores. In that journey, what were some of the insights or lessons that you think are still valid for people when they're scaling?
So I'll do a little bit of a plug for the master class that I'm doing after this session, where I talk about something called second orbit. And the concept is like this, that if you look at businesses, the growth in business is never linear. It's usually a sequence of S-curves. So you do some things, you see growth, and you flatten out, and you have to find the next one. At Persistent now, I would say we are in the 6th orbit. But the transition from the first orbit to the second orbit is what I'm going to talk about in the master class, and we call it second orbit. And the idea there is that the small businesses, when they start, they are very founder-centric. So everything happens in and around the founder. But when you get to the second orbit, you have to build a system and a company with all kinds of, you should have the ability to hire other colleagues and other people. And that requires a different kind of thinking. So this transition from 100 to 1000 requires a rewiring of the company in certain ways so that you are able to allow other people to come in, and it's not just my company, it becomes our company. And that transition is something that I find is rather difficult for very small businesses, and that is something that I think people from Chandigarh, if you say that there are 100 people companies, that is one of the things that they should be thinking about.
I think the important point is that you have to be open to get people from outside.
Yes.
And give them the space to.
Correct. See, what happens is that when you start your own business, you're thinking about you and your team, and it's just you in the center of the business. You get to a certain point and you realize that you can't do everything. For the company to grow, you need to bring other colleagues to work with you. And if you want to bring senior colleagues to work with you, then you need to give them room to grow with you. And that's why you need to change the company to feel like it belongs to all of us rather than just to me. And that transition has many repercussions across the business, but that is an important part of what this transition is all about.
Okay. So one of the concerns that some people may have is that when you go through this transition, how do you keep the old culture alive?
Yeah.
There's always this big debate that I see in my own company. Sir, culture change ho raha hai. And you're saying that it's a good thing.
Yes, I think, see, there are two parts to culture, I would say. One part is the core values of the company, which to some extent don't need to change, because at the end of it, your core values are your core values, whether you're a small business or a large business. Those are pretty much constant. The other part of culture is the way of doing things. How do you get things done? How do you make things happen? Clearly, in that sense, the very small businesses where I can see everything that is happening in the company, that kind of a culture is only good for that level of business. But as you get to 1,000 people, you will not know everybody in the company. So the culture is bound to change. But doing it deliberately and willingly is, I think, important. Believing that culture will never change is not a good idea. But you know the culture is going to change, but how do you make it happen so that it is what you want it to be? I think that is where the difference is. But let me say one last thing in this context. See, when you go through these orbit, every orbit, whatever works in the first orbit actually doesn't work very well in the second one. So you have to find new ways to move from one orbit to the other one, and you have to do new things as well. So it inherently requires you to do things differently when you shift from one orbit to the other orbit. Just because you do something different doesn't mean it's bad. It's just different.
Great. No, I think this is key. The old order changeth, yielding place to you, right? Pretty much Tennyson all over again.
Yeah, and again, many of the people may be willing to shift with the change. So it's not like people have to shift all the time. But if necessary, that could happen. But clearly, there is an opportunity for people also to upgrade their skills to move up the next orbit.
Excellent. I think one of the conversations, and as we get to the 1,000 people mark, and you mentioned orbits, and I recommend everybody to check out Dr. Deshpande's LinkedIn post, and he's actually shared a link to the deck that he will be presenting. And some of us have already attended some of his master classes. In fact, he had a much larger fan following than I anticipated. A lot of people have attended his NASCOM sessions and also the sessions that he's conducted at the Gokhale Institute. Yeah. So I would strongly recommend that everybody at least look at the slides, and if you get the opportunity to go attend the different, he runs a year-long program at the Gokhale Institute, right?
Yeah, I've been doing a one-year program on second orbit at Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics in Pune. And also we are trying to do more of this through IIT Bombay. And IIT Bombay has a Desai Sethi School of Entrepreneurship. So with NASCOM's SME Forum, we have done a few sessions there as well. But see, the reality is that in India, we have large number of very small businesses. And many of these businesses have a great opportunity to grow and scale. If businesses do well, it's good for everybody. You get more jobs, more economy, everything else. And there are just a few things that founders, should I say, hold on to, which make it difficult for them to grow. So by encouraging them and meeting other founders who have grown, the idea is to build that community so that everyone feels confident about scaling your business and you're not happy to stay at 100, but you are willing to look at 1,000 and 10,000 and more.
I think this interesting debate about, everybody talks about startups and entrepreneurship, but I think there is a healthy mix of how, founders and employment, how does that play out? Because founders provide a safe space for a lot of employees to grow. What do you think about the dynamic? I mean, is there an overemphasis on being a startup entrepreneur rather than creating a business?
Meaning, ideally, startup entrepreneurs should create a business, and it's the business that's going to feed everybody else. So, in a way, they should go together, because startup entrepreneurs have become a really good fashionable things to talk about. So I think it's good to motivate people to say you are doing a startup. But the reality of startups is in the success of the revenues that you generate and the profits you make. So I think really focusing on a business that generates profit is kind of very important. And the fact you start a business is fine, but how you sustain it and scale it, I think are equally important.
Great. As you move on, as you mentioned that, about 5 years ago, you handed over charge. So I'm going to jump ahead to the 20,000 stage, right? And I would actually strongly encourage everybody to look at some of these annual reports. They are a delight to read, and visually a delight as well, on how to grow business and how they have grown. But now that 5 years ago, you handed over your reins to a professional CEO, what was the hardest part for you?
See, when you run a business and you are in the sort of the CEO's job, it is very exciting, as you would expect, right? There's a lot of action, there are a lot of things happening all the time. And to say that, okay, I'm going to do something different and walk away from that excitement is very hard. But, as I mentioned before, that I think individuals and founders and the company need to have two different existences. So at a certain point in my life, I got to the point, having run the business for almost 28, 29 years, that, yeah, I could do it for another 2-3 years, but I couldn't see myself doing it for the next 30 years. I felt I was getting too locked in, and there were many other things I wanted to do. So one of the things that I spoke to several of my friends to see, okay, what does it take to move on? How should you go about it? And one good piece of advice that I got was that have enough other things that you can do. Because if you don't have other things to do, then you will feel like interfering in the business, and you will not give room to the CEO to do his job. So essentially accepting the fact that a new person who comes in is going to run the business differently, and letting him run was the important part of doing that. And the fact that I had other things I picked up helped me focus on other things, and thereby letting the CEO do his job, which was very important.
And the CEO has been very successful, right?
Yes, actually he has done very well. He has actually grown the business the growth rates that we've had in the last 3 years have been extremely good.
So it's not necessarily for the founder to continue, be around for the company to be successful.
Correct.
I think this is a great example of another homegrown success, if you will. And when you mentioned, were the tricky points? So at this stage, what is the role of the founder? Is it a sounding board? Is it stepping in? For example, we saw in the case of Infosys, right? They got Nandan back, and then they got another CEO to provide transitions at this very large company scale. But we haven't seen that kind of public disruption.
No, I think it's, again, all these things are a company-specific thing. But what I have done is, as a founder, I remain, quote-unquote, in the listed company space called a promoter.
Okay.
So I am the chairman of the company, and I still own a good chunk of the shares in the company. So I'm involved to that extent. So I spend about 4 hours every week in the company, roughly meeting an hour, half an hour to 45 minutes with the CEO, another half an hour, 45 minutes with the CFO, and then company secretary and a bunch of other things. Because at the end of it, as the promoter in the stock market parlance, I have fiduciary responsibility to everything that happens in the company. So to that extent, I fulfill my responsibility there. But on the operating side, I stay away from the day-to-day operations, because if you start getting involved, then there is a temptation to give advice and do things which can be really bad. So I stay out of those parts.
Okay. So you're saying that nothing operational, just fiduciary responsibilities?
Yes,
that has worked well.
Yes.
Great, great. The other interests that have kept you busy, you want to talk about some of those?
Yes. So I'm predominantly working in three broad areas. One is in the entrepreneurship area, and I had run two things. One is Second Orbit that we talked about. I also run a foundation, which is a personal philanthropy foundation called Dayasara Foundation. And in Dayasara Foundation, we are focused on nano entrepreneurs, businesses that are between 5 lakh rupees a year to 1 crore a year. So these are very, very tiny food counters, beauty salons, those kinds of businesses. And we have a platform that has helped about 275,000 businesses roughly in this category. These really tiny businesses. And I think real jobs happen in that category. So that's one segment. The other area that I've got very interested and intrigued by is that if you go to hospitals in India, and especially for cancer or any other disease, you will find that the treatment we get in, say, Chandigarh or in Mumbai is the same as what you get in San Francisco and New York, or London for that matter. So the reality is that the reason we are getting the same treatment is because we are treating people on the basis of data and analysis that was done in the US or in Norway for diabetes and other countries, or Denmark. We don't have our own data sets for our own people to treat our own diseases, which is kind of sad. We are almost 1.4 billion people and we just don't have any data of our own. So I've been working with a set of people to try to see how to build data sets for Indians so that we can do research against those Indians. And that has been quite exciting. And as a consequence of that, I got involved in another activity which is related to this. So the government, specifically the Department of Biotechnology, has created something called Biotechnology Research and Innovation Council. And I'm the co-chair of that right now. So I've been spending some time thinking about the biotechnology and bioindustry. And yesterday I was here at NABI, which is one of the DBT labs, which is part of BRIC.
Great. So, guys, there's lots of good things to do even when you sort of hang up your boots. I think we are almost at the end of our time, so I can take one or two questions if anybody has any questions for Dr. Deshpande. Jitin, yeah.
I think you can ask, we can repeat your question.
Yeah, yeah. Why don't you?
You mentioned about additional businesses or additional things that that founder could be involved in, or you could add to your business as part of your second. Would it be additional related businesses typically? Or
No. As I said, staying out of persistent was important. And for me to stay out of persistent, I had something else to do as well, right? So that is the word I was trying to refer to. And most of the other things I'm doing are all non-profit type activities.
Sorry, I was mentioning about as a founder, when you launch a next orbit or take it to the next scale, that when you add areas of business to your business, would it be related additional businesses or?
Yeah, normally it would be related. It would be the next step in some sense of the business. But, it's very hard when you are at the top of the S curve to really stretch that to get to an exponential number beyond that. Unless you do something different. Because if that was not the case, you wouldn't be at the top of the S curve. So trying to do something different is essential, and that's what this is all about.
Last question. Excellent. I think we are the only panel that got finished on time. Thank you, Dr. Deshpande, for your excellent time. Thank you for coming down.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Deshpande, and thank you so much, Mr. Ramsisaria, for that conversation. There's a saying that live as if you were to die tomorrow, learn as if you were to live forever. So there's no end to learning, especially from someone who's built a $1 billion company, ladies and gentlemen. And to felicitate this panel, may I request the presence of Mr. Anirudh Gupta, CEO, DCM Group of Schools, to come up and do the honors. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Dr. Anand Deshpande, founder and chairman, Persistent Systems. And ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Alok Ramsisaria, co-founder and CEO, Grazitti Interactive. Well, if it was a good conversation, it deserves a louder round of applause. Many thanks, gentlemen. Many thanks for joining us on this stage here. Since every minute is precious and time is just running away so quickly with an old proverb which says, conversations are food for the soul, and undoubtedly so because sometimes it's just one idea or one conversation that could give us our eureka